Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you, and welcome to this episode where we will be looking at Muslims entering churches, but also non-Muslims entering mosques. Muslims entering other people's places of worship, synagogues, temples, etc., but also the other way around. This is part of the series on Muslim relations with Christians, Jews, and others. I am your host, Muhammad Nuruddin Lemo, and with me to discuss this topic are two of our distinguished facilitators, Brother Muhammad Jamil and Brother Ibrahim Bello. You're both most welcome. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I'd like to start with the question of Muslims entering other people's places of worship. Some Muslims have a problem with it. They consider it not acceptable. But at the same time, we have the issue of non-Muslims entering mosques, and some people look at that as also not acceptable. Let's start with the issue of our own home front, the mosques. Is it okay for non-Muslims, Christians, Jews, or Ahl al-Kitab, and others, people of other religions or no religion, is it okay from the Islamic point of view to enter the mosque, or is a mosque such a sacred place that, it's only Muslims who can come in? Brother Jamil.
Alhamdulillah, you see, it is always good that we start with, in Islam, we don't do things just on our own. There are guiding principles, and particularly the Quran and the Sunnah and the Sirah of Prophet ﷺ. And also, it is also very important that mosques all around the world are places that have reverence, places that are supposed to be kept with high regard and the rest. And in Islam also, 3 mosques have highest ranking. The Haram, that's the mosque in Mecca of Kaaba. Then you have the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ in Medina, and you have the mosque in Jerusalem, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. These are 3 that have the highest ranking. Now, the issue you have raised is, of course, Prophet ﷺ was the one who came with the Quran and also the Sunnah, and he lived and he had a mosque. What happened around his mosque? I think if we go back to that, we'll see, and looking at that, we'll see that this issue of non-Muslims coming into the mosque is not a new issue at all, because it is clear in different occasions and at different times for different reasons, non-Muslims were allowed into the Prophet's mosque, which is the second highest regarded mosque in the world. So if non-Muslims can enter such a mosque, then I think it's, of course, scholars can have some views and maybe owing to interpretation of a verse or an hadith and begin to restrict, but the reality is that of the Prophet was entered by non-Muslims. And of course, like in Medina, many a times if he has any delegation coming to interact with him, the only place he hosts them is a mosque. And most of these delegations that come are non-Muslims. Some are even polytheists, and they come and they enter the mosque and they have all the discussions in the mosque and they go. In fact, the one that is most spectacular is about in the last year of his mission, the year he died, as the 10th year of Hijrah. There are Christians who came from Najran, about 60 of them. They came to interact with him and ask some questions to get some details about what his missions were. And they did that in the mosque. In fact, they stayed days in the mosque. In fact, it was even aligned with a time of worship. And he said, just use a portion of the mosque. And they gave them a portion and they did their worship in the mosque. That shows that people, non-Muslims, are allowed to come into the mosque. In fact, you have, like I said, it's like an administrative center of the Muslims. So even when you have people like captured, like the case of Sumama bin Uthal, who even came with the intention of killing him, and he was apprehended, chained in the mosque, and he came and met him in the mosque. He was not the one that admitted him into the mosque. It was the companions. But Prophet ﷺ came and met him in the mosque, and he didn't say, take him out. In fact, he interacted with him and even ordered that he should be given food and the rest. And then afterwards, he he related with him. Yeah, so you have some people be saying, no, Sumama's case is like a special case, because some will claim that there is a verse in the Quran, chapter 9, verse 28, where Allah Ta'ala is talking about that mushrikun are najas. And then there, فَلَا تَقْرَبُوا مَسْجِدَ الْحَرَامِ بَعْدَ عَامٍ هَذَا. They should not come close to Masjid al-Haram. Of course, that is even clear after this year. So that now that this verse came to prohibit non-Muslim from coming to the mosque, but this is not true, as we will see in the course of discussion when we're discussing this verse. That is not the view of every scholar. Scholars have different opinion about that. Some will also say that now this Sumama's case is just a special case because he was captured and kept in mosque, so it shouldn't be generalized. And some will say no, Sumama was Prophet ﷺ had a pre-information from Allah. Allah pre-informed him that at the end of it, he is going to embrace Islam. Fine, even if that is the case. At the time he entered, he wasn't a Muslim. So, of course, the point of discuss is, can non-Muslim enter the mosque? And we also have scholars like Ibn Qayyim, who said about if Christians and Jews and others are allowed into the mosque of Prophet, then that's how it's a precedence that non-Muslims are not denied or prohibited from entering into masajid. We also have the polytheists, especially the Banu Thaqif from Taif. When they came to Prophet in the 9th year of Hijrah, he welcomed, received them in his mosque and interacted with them. And so all of this are going to show that this sin is not a new issue. It's an issue that has been there with us because Prophet lived in a multi-religious and multicultural and heterogeneous society. Therefore, he had all these relations and he never stopped them from entering the mosque. So, based on this, of course, like I said at the beginning, there are scholars who hold different views, but this is a bit more clearer that the one who came with the religion, the Sharia, allowed non-Muslim into his mosque. Allahu Alam.
Malam Ibrahim, what would you add to this, please?
Yeah, like he said, the case of Sumama is clear, but one might still insist that no, but that was before the verse. But other things are about the end of the Prophet's life, like the last 2 years. A number of non-Muslim delegations were coming.
This was like 9th and 10th year of Hijrah. Yes, of course,
the 9th year, 10th year, 9th year precisely. They came. Some of them were polytheists, some were Christians. They were in his mosque. So Imam Shafi'i will say, if a polytheist could sleep in the mosque, then definitely a Muslim can. So there is nothing prohibiting non-Muslims from coming into the mosque. In Mukhtasar, Sayyid Sabiq cited Mukhtasar that there is no harm for a polytheist to stay in the mosque. Similarly, you have this verse of Innamal mushrikuna najas, which is always the primary reference for those who say it. And number one, let's look at how. The essence of the verse was the Prophet ﷺ sent a delegation to perform Hajj the 9th year, led by Abu Bakr. Now, because of the history of Hajj that dates back to Prophet Ibrahim, pagans were used to their own way of Hajj. So Muslims do meet them, they do their own tawaf, naked, they do all sorts of sacrifices and what have you.
That's how the mushrikun did their own.
So and Muslims, they go and do it together.
Side by side.
Of them, side by side.
Yeah, they do their own, you do your own.
So when the verse was revealed, the Prophet ﷺ commissioned Ali radiallahu anhu to quickly go and tell them. And look at the message of the verse. Allah said, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu innamal mushrikuna najas. فَلَا يَقْرَبُوا الْمَسْجِدَ الْحَرَامَ بَعْدَ عَامِهِمْ هَذَا. That all you have attained faith, the polytheists are filth, they are impure. Henceforth, after this year, so it's like giving them ultimatum that they shouldn't come closer to the haram. So it is understood here to mean they shouldn't come back to worship. Because historically also, the slaves, non-Muslim slaves, and the Zimmis, the non-Muslim citizens, were exempted from this. So scholars, some other scholars are of the view that no, this prohibition of non-Muslims entering the mosque is just to protect all these because of the sanctity of the Haram, the inviolable mosque of Mecca only. But that there is nothing wrong that prohibits non-Muslims from entering the mosque. This is the view of many scholars. The Hanafi scholars particularly, like Imam al-Sarakhsi mentioned in Al-Muhit, are of the view that even the Haram, a non-Muslim can enter. That is their view. So while others will say they can enter, but with the exception of the Haram, they are of the view that even the Haram non-Muslims can enter. That this verse
only prohibits worshiping.
Yes,
there.
exactly. This verse is only prohibiting them from worshipping. Because immediately after the conquest of Mecca, and this verse was revealed thereafter, a year after, we still have non-Muslims and a number of polytheists. They live in Mecca, they go to Haram.
And they were buried there.
They were buried there.
Among the Ahl Dhimma and slaves.
Exactly. And sometimes Haram includes the whole of Mecca, not only the mosque. So there's nothing wrong in non-Muslims entering the mosque if they can be allowed into the Prophet's mosque and other mosques. So the verse that Innamal Mushrikuna Najas is not about impurity, but it's about spiritual impurity. It's not saying because they are junub, because some will argue that, but when they are sexually impure, so they don't perform ritual bath like Muslims do. So that is it. But that is not enough a reason, because what we see from history is that the Prophet ﷺ relate with them and they spend time in his mosque. So this cannot be generalized. It's a specific case to a particular context. And the essence is only to prevent them from performing Hajj, henceforth from in the Haram, or at least to protect the sanctity of the Holy Mosque of Mecca.
This is interesting, because what you are saying, I think that both of you, is that on this subject, the Mosque of the Prophet, which from the point of view of sacredness would be considered the second most important, definitely above any other Juma mosque anywhere in the world, definitely more than our neighborhood mosque, more than our central mosque in this city or any other city. The Prophet accommodated non-Muslims. It was where delegations met for what you may call worldly purposes of negotiation. But it was also a place where dialogues took place. It was a place where treaties were signed and agreed to. And as you've mentioned, they slept there. Narrated by Ibn Qayyim in his Ahkam Ahl Dhimma, and you've mentioned many of these classical scholars. But Malam Ibrahim, you bring an interesting side to it, which is that among the Hanafi scholars, quoting Sarakhsi, who is citing others, and a respected Hanafi scholar, that even Masjid al-Haram is the mosque in Mecca is a place where historically non-Muslims were allowed to come there and live in Mecca, but just not to worship. That their understanding of the verse is it was prohibiting the non-Muslims or the polytheists from their annual pilgrimage and worship there, especially when the idols have been removed and all of that. And the logic I understand from that is if non-Muslims could be allowed even there, then where else are you going to say they are not allowed? And how could you interpret the verse to prohibit them? That even if you go with the majority opinion of Shafi, the Maliki, the others, that non-Muslims are not allowed into the Haram of Mecca.
Only.
It is understood that is the only mosque that you have evidence, at least from one interpretation of the verse in Tawbah. This is interesting. How would you respond to those who would cite another verse in Surah Tawbah where Allah talks about the unacceptability or inappropriateness of non-Muslims visiting or tending to mosques? What would you say about that?
Yeah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually said, مَا كَانَ لِلْمُشْرِكِينَ أَن يَأْمُرُوا مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ. It does not befit the polytheists to be the ones in charge of looking after and maintaining the mosque. Some riwayah will say masjid, not masajid. Okay? Some say masajid. Allah say, Inna ma ya'muru masajid Allah. The only people that deserve, or the rightful people actually, to maintain and look after the mosque are man amana billah, those who believe with Allah, in Allah, wal yawmil akhir wa qama salah. The last day, and they are steadfast with their salah. Now, this verse is not saying they should not, but is a sort of what Arab will call dhammun, condemning, saying that is double standard. It is not you who disbelieve in Allah that should now say you are in charge of looking after the mosque. Because Arabs in Mecca have that pride earlier on to be in charge of Haram. Even among the Meccans, you have a group that is their pride. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is now challenging and condemning them that that's double standard. Why would you say you are in charge of the mosque, you look after the mosque, whereas you disbelieve in God? So that is one. Number two, let us look at history. Just in case somebody is not comfortable with that interpretation. Because you need to know the scenario, the context surrounding revelation. Let's look at history. Immediately when these verses were revealed, Mushrik were still in Mecca. Okay? Secondly, the Prophet ﷺ allowed non-Muslims into his mosque. Again, the non-Muslim slaves were exempted from this exception of those that were barred from worshipping. So if there is anything non-Muslims are prevented or prohibited from doing at the mosque, actually, is the worship. But not going there for any reason. The essence of their going there might be to go and learn, might be for exposure, might be to know about Muslims. I remember one day I've ever seen a group of non-Muslim tourists that were toured around a mosque. And they were asking, where is Allah, where is Muhammad? Because earlier before then, they were having the understanding that these are two status Muslims worship in the mosque. But they are coming into the mosque, clarify that is not true. When somebody tells them, no, they are not there now. They say, what about their pictures? They say, we don't put pictures. They say, true. Like he couldn't even believe it. So the thing is, there is nothing wrong in a non-Muslim coming into the mosque if there is need for it. And I used to feel for any Muslim, non-Muslim that even want to come to the mosque, I think there is there is tolerance and peaceful coexistence. Because as far as I know, most of the time, non-Muslims avoid the mosque, particularly in our own context, because there has not been that true good harmony, particularly when it comes to religious issues. So it's very rare to see a non-Muslim coming through the mosque or pass, even if there's a road that you have to pass through the mosque compound or thereabout, they avoid it. So I think there is nothing discouraging them. Rather, we should do what will encourage them.
Excellent.
Come see what we do in the mosque. This is the mosque, and this is what we do. Yes, sir.
Jamil.
So I think I will take it from the point that the verse he has quoted is not a clear prohibition, and there isn't any verse or any hadith that has also laid a condition for non-Muslims entering the mosque, like some people will say issue of taking ritual birth, as that is not even part of their own doctrine. So it is not on them. It is on Muslims to take a ritual birth after having sexual intercourse with their spouses. So it's not on them. And this absence of this clear evidence, then we go back to istishab, continuity. What is there is that it has been allowed and nothing has stopped it. So we don't come and say now it is stopped. If you say now it is stopped, then we need to have a proof that is clear enough from either Quran or the Sunnah of Prophet ﷺ. It is also good to cite some scholars like scholars of the Shafi and Hanabila school, the Hanbali school scholars, as well as even Imam Ash-Shaybani, who would say from the Hanafi school, say no. You see, the thing is that non-Muslims are allowed to enter mosque, except in their own case, the Kaaba. And like already that has been cited by Malam Ibrahim, and also Ibn Kathir would say there is nothing prohibiting non-Muslims to enter the mosque. The only place will be Al-Haram of Mecca. So all of them link into that one interpretation of the verse, Innama ya'muru masajid Allahi man amana billah, to the end of the verse as quoted by Mullah Ibrahim. Therefore, what I would even want to say is that it is even an opportunity for education. It's an opportunity for da'wah that's carrying out passing the message, because when they come in, then they will ask questions like Mullah Ibrahim just, where is the status of Allah? Where is the status of Muhammad? They are not there. Oh, we thought, just like in some places of our worship, we have status of our gods, and we are told you worship Allah and Muhammad. Where is your own? That's again clear a misconception from just entering the mosque. Clear that misconception. And of course, you will see around the world in countries like Egypt, Turkey, Oman, Bahrain, and the rest, and even Nigeria, you will see some non-Muslims going around the mosque. That's like tourists. We want to see what is it there. I know most of our interfaith engagements around here in Nigeria, we deliberately put visit to places of worship, where the Muslims will go into churches and the non-Muslims will come into the mosque, and we ask questions, and you are clear about certain things that you are not clear about in the past. So it is naturally expected that non-Muslims, because they are not denied the entrance into the mosque, but we should also know that even if we are going to allow them, then we need to put it to them. There are some norms or some etiquettes that should be observed, because like every place of worship have their own rules and regulations that you have to observe, like the female dressing properly and the rest of them. So this is okay. The non-Muslims should also know that if you want to come into the mosque, then these are some of the things that you have to observe. Like you don't bring impurity, dirt into the mosque, all of these things. So if you see Muslims,
you wouldn't into anybody's house.
Yes. If you see Muslims coming around the mosque and then removing their footwear, then you don't say, no, I am not a Muslim. No, it's not about being a Muslim. Even Muslims can go into the mosque in some hadith with their footwear, but they do that because the carpets are there, so they don't want to litter the place. They don't want to get it dirty. So you just follow as they do, and then you will be given that permission, because the permission has already been there. So you just be allowed to enter without any restriction. So, but it's important to know that there is no clear-cut Quran verse that prohibits, and if it doesn't exist, then it means they are allowed. The permissibility is in continuity.
So you've basically made it clear that various categories of non-Muslims did enter the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ, and they went in for various reasons. And I think various scholars have discussed this, as you've mentioned. This is not a new topic in Islamic jurisprudence. You've mentioned the diversity of views, scholars within the Hanafi school, some who consider it permissible even for the non-Muslims to be in the Haram of Makkah, just prohibited from worshipping there, as you've cited Sarakhsi, but you've also mentioned Imam al-Shaybani, even from the Hanafi school, who holds a contrary view, but the majority saying non-Muslims can enter mosques other than the Haram of Makkah. And you've mentioned the reality, a lot of tourists, a lot of educational visits to mosques that serve as enlightenment, especially in these days of greater tension, Islamophobia, misconceptions about Islam, the need to expose people to the mosques. And we've got actually, some mosques that have open days where they deliberately prepare the mosque for non-Muslims to come and visit. They give them timing so it doesn't interrupt acts of worship. Exactly. But also, as you've mentioned, for people to dress in ways or behave in ways that don't interfere or interrupt people who are worshipping. I would like us to move on to the question of churches and Muslims going into churches, other people's places of worship, synagogues. Because I think, what you've said, even the issue of innamal mushrikuna najasun, those who say non-Muslims are najas, I think you've adequately, because I wanted to ask that question, but I think you've already explained that the understanding of najas here is not that the Muslims are the non-Muslim is physically impure, that the verse is referring to the aqidah, the belief. But in spite of that verse, in view of the fact that that verse was, after that verse was revealed, we still find non-Muslims visiting the mosque in Medina. So a lot of the evidence, in order to be interpreted in such a way that there's no contradiction, takes us to the conclusion that these verses were not prohibiting people from entering mosques. And whatever interpretation of any hadith, the reality is various non-Muslims, Ahl al-Kitab and Mushrikun, did go into mosques. On the question of entering churches, just as we invite people of other faiths into our mosques, sometimes it is reciprocated. And Muslims are invited to churches for all sorts of purposes, for interfaith dialogues, for educational visits, just to see what's going on, ask questions about others, for weddings, funerals, all sorts of visits. Alam Ibrahim, is it acceptable for Muslims to enter churches for those type of purposes?
Okay.
Or synagogues?
Let's look at it from the other way. Is it prohibited? Or is there anything that prohibits Muslims from entering churches? We said no. Because it's a mu'amala issue, like we know. Where there is no text, then the status quo is istishab, presumption of permissibility. So the truth is that Muslims are not prohibited from entering churches. This is because great Sahabas, Ali, Umar, Muawiyah, in a number of instances, entered into churches in more than one instance. At a point, Ali and some of his Sahabas even ate in the church. In Mughni, it is even cited that Muawiyah at a point gave a talk. He's the Muslim leader, the Khalif, in the church. More so, we have a basis. The Prophet ﷺ who said, Ju'ilat li al-ardu masjidan wa tahura, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the whole of the heart pure and a place of worship. So that makes it permissible. There's nothing in contrary. So Muslims can actually go into church if there is need for it. And in fact, as we shall see later, like the Prophet said, masjidan, you can even pray. The most important thing is, what Muslims should be asking is, why going to the church? I think that's most important, but it's not about permissibility now. As long as you're not going in to worship, of course you're a Muslim. Just like they cannot come in to worship in your mosque, and that is only haram. Because as with the mosque, sometimes the Prophet even allowed them to do their worship in his mosque. But with Muslims, what are you going to do there? I think that should be the most important thing, not going into the mosque, in the church really. Because we are very much interrelated. We've got families where some members of the families are Christians. So every now and then they have a need to invite people to church for a wedding. Sometimes even for dialogue, sometimes even for education. So the idea of don't going to church has no any basis really, but rather, what do you go into the church? As long as it is not worship, or you are not going to commit a crime or a sin, I think it is permissible. Allahu Alam.
Alan Jamil.
Okay, there's something that we need to look at, and of course in Islam, most of the operational rules are related to relationship and the rest. Apart from what Prophet ﷺ did, came again during his the lifetime of his companions, especially the four caliphs, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. Sayyidina Umar, in the case, the non-Muslims requested to expand their place of worship while he was a Khalifa. He said, problem, expand it. In fact, even make it a place that permits my Muslim brothers and sisters, if they are, because it's on the path, if they are traveling and the night caught up with them, please always admit them to sleep in the church. And you should please host them as long as even for 3 days. Keep feeding them just to show that peaceful coexistence and relationship. But the point of note here is that he said they should be allowed to enter and to even sleep there. So if Muslims are not permitted to enter into the churches, then you wouldn't have said they should be allowed into the church and even pass the night, and even they should be fed with. You also have the scholars like Ibn Qudama, who would say that it is even permissible to even say your prayers, enter, and even there are statues of their gods and goddesses it doesn't matter, you can enter, because so did the companions of Prophet ﷺ. And that reminds me of the Sirah, or the instance as Mal Ibrahim quoted about Sayyidina Ali and others eating in the mosque. It was during the caliphate of Sayyidina Umar. He asked them, they provided food and said, where is the food? He said, it's in the church. And there were statues there. They entered, and he said, go and eat. All of them entered. Sayyidina Umar didn't enter. And when he was asked, some scholars said, he said, I don't want to enter so that later in the history, they will not say this is a place where Amir al-Mu'minin stood. So it should be taken over to Muslims. I don't want them to lose their place of worship. But they ate, they entered and they ate in the mosque. So people, though, because some people say, no, we don't want to enter because there are statues. This was the same case. Sayyidina Umar ordered all his companions with Sayyidina Ali to enter. They entered and ate in the mosque. So we should also know that it's very important. It's very, very important that as Muslims we are allowed to enter the churches. But like Mal Ibrahim say, what are you going to do there? You are not permitted to go and join them in their worship. If it's an act of worship, they want to do their Sunday Mass like the Catholics, or they want to do their Sunday worship like other Protestants will do and the rest. You don't go and say you want to, because of interpersonal relation, because I want to keep peaceful coexistence, then you join them in their Mass. No, you will be going against the tenets of Islam, because you are not supposed to worship in any other form of worship of any other religion except that Islam has prescribed.
You don't imitate in areas of worship.
You don't imitate them in their devotional acts of worship at all. Allah.
I mean, you've moved on to this question of Muslims even praying in the mosque, in churches and synagogues and these type of places. We've seen how in one of the narrations, the Prophet accommodated, according to various narrations, Ibn Qayyim in his Ahkam al-Dhimma, others, that the Christians of Najran even prayed in the mosque. I mean, some say the hadith is mursal, broken chain, but other scholars accept it as still strong because of who narrated this hadith. The other way around, I'd like to start looking. Is it okay for Muslims to say their own prayers in churches? Because I know of parts of the world where Muslims don't have Jummah mosques, and because on Fridays, the church is the only place big enough to handle some congregations, you actually have agreements between the mosque and the Muslim communities that during those periods of Jummah service, Muslims would actually use the church as places where they pray. You've mentioned that Sahaba went into these places in spite of the fact that there were statues there. Of course, some were not comfortable with statues. Some even scholars would say no if there are statues. But regarding what exactly happened, the mosque was used. What more can you share on this?
See, Mal Ibrahim cited the hadith, Ju'ilat liyal ard masjidan wa tahura, that the land, the whole earth, has been made for me a place of sujood. That's a place of worship. That's anywhere on the earth I can pray, and it is pure. So this is clear. And in fact, he said, wherever the prayer meets you, pray there.
No.
Except now, we will now say, if there's any impediment that would not, maybe there's impurity on that spot of the earth, then you move away from there to another place. But without that, then it becomes a place of worship. So now, the question will be, what is the injunction, what verse, or what hadith, or what seerah of Prophet ﷺ prohibits Muslims from praying in the churches? Because church is part of the earth. And it's pure and it's a masjid. So, like you said, in that case, one would, without any iota of feeling that I'm saying the wrong thing, say it is okay for them to say their Jumat mosque in the church, because that's a conditional thing that you don't have any other place. And even that place is part of the earth that you should pray on. And we should also, like as Cindy would observe, that from the hadith, it is very, very clear that unless something comes in, it is allowed. And if it is allowed, and that is the position, then again we go back to that tool of jurisprudence, istishab.
Legal presumption.
Legal presumption. It is permitted, it is permitted. What stops it, you have to bring. If you don't have, then it is permitted. And I think this I would stop here.
Thank you. So unlike, so basically what you're saying is, based on the hadith, the whole earth is a masjid, is a place of prayer. You can pray anywhere except where you can't pray. And so it's like...
Yeah, let me add, of course there's hadith, and that I think we need to cite that. Prophet ﷺ even clearly in another hadith said, every place, all part of earth is a place for me to bow and do sujood, except the graveyard and the bathroom. You can see, he has given, like now, you would not say, you don't go to graveyard and say, I'm going because it's part of the earth. No, there is this clear hadith that says, except this one. That has been removed. You will not go into a bedroom and say you want to pray because he said, except that one. So where is that hadith, or where that say, except churches, synagogues, and temples
and co. So the absence of evidence allows the legal precedence to take, which is, it is permissible. What would you add to this, Ibrahim?
Yeah, just to add, Imam Ibn Qudama said there is nothing wrong for a Muslim to pray in the church as long as the place is clean. And he mentioned a number of predecessors, like Umar bin Abdul Aziz, Ash-Sha'bi, Awza'i, Sa'id bin Abdul Aziz, and a number of them, that even Abi Musa al-Ash'ari and Umar, that was their position. Imam al-Bukhari has a chapter titled, chapter Babu as-Salatu fil Kanais, meaning you can pray in the mosque, in the church.
So the title of the chapter
is
the book on prayer in churches.
Yes. And he brought a number of evidence in support of that. And it is worth noting that whatever ruling applied to church apply to other places too, like the synagogue and temple and other places of worship. Now, major observation raised by those who are not comfortable is because there are statues. This statue in the churches do not prevent people from praying. The most you can say is makruh. That's the position of Imam Malik.
Because some churches actually have statues of Jesus, of Mary,
particularly the Catholic. So the most you say is it is makruh. It's not haram. And one evidence in support of that is because the Prophet ﷺ do pray in Kaaba earlier before the conquest of Makkah, when you still have idols, and he's still praying. So you can't even say it's haram. But the most you can say is that it is makruh.
That's discouraged.
Discouraged. So there's nothing wrong in Muslims pray in the church if need be. And like you say, some places Muslims have to rent a hall in the church or in the seminary for their Eid prayer, for their mosques. And some of us had experience that we ever traveled to some part of the country where there are predominantly non-Muslims. And some of us arrived late hours. And the only place we slept was in the church. And fine, it was okay. You feel comfortable. Some of us actually prayed in there. Because of this understanding that the Prophet said, "Ju'ilat al-ardu masjidan wa tahuran." I think it's good Muslims understand that Islam is not against where you pray. And this is part of the reasons that further show the tolerance of Islam, that other religions can actually be. It's not about everybody must be a Muslim. But there should be peaceful coexistence, and there is need be for Muslims to go into churches. The only thing they don't do in the church is worship. That's the worship of the non-Muslims. But their own worship they can. Wallahu alam.
Thank you very much for clarifying. So basically, in summary, At the time of the Prophet, non-Muslims of various persuasions entered the mosques, and Muslims entered churches. And while there may be debate among some Muslims on the permissibility or otherwise of non-Muslims saying their own prayers in the mosque, there's also debate, but clearly we have adequate evidence that Muslims did say their own prayers in churches and places of worship, based also on the hadith. But there's historical evidence that that actually happened, and the need to be cautious about interpreting Islam in a way that actually conflicts with the understanding of the Prophet and his companions. May Allah continue to guide us. Scholars do differ, but the need to learn to agree to disagree agreeably and to look at contexts where the benefit of opening mosques, visiting churches, improving relations between Muslims and people of other faiths has become really, really critical, especially in these days where we've got a rise of anti-religious sentiments. People are against even having mosques and having churches and having these things. So the need to look at ways of better bridge building and better education for each other. Thank you very much for your time, your contributions. Jazakumullahu khairan. Till next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.